Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. I want to introduce you to an incredibly impressive young lady tonight who is an expert on transit-oriented development, waterfront development, and really development issues, infrastructure issues around the Greater Toronto Area. And I think it'll be an interesting conversation. Her name is Sherena Hussain. She is a global thought leader in infrastructure, a lawyer, an advisor to new partnership and sustainable finance models. She's a professor, she's a speaker, she travels the world. Last time I spoke with her, she was off to the West Coast to speak in California. She's a founder of an organization called Academic Collaboration Consulting that are professors and smart academic people that provide consulting services. And I caught up with her most recently when she was a speaker at the Urban Land Institute on affordable housing and transit-oriented development. And so I really wanted to bring her in because we have a lot of those issues in Mississauga. So welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming. So in my short description, what did I leave out?
I think you covered quite a bit in terms of the type of work that I do, and effectively it's about using leading research and innovative thinking to address some of the key challenges, including when we think about development, real estate, and infrastructure, and how they all come together.
Okay, great. So I interviewed the deputy economist for CMHC, and they came out 2 weeks ago with a report that said that we need 1.8 million new homes, extra homes, not new homes, but homes above what would be built anyway, in the next 8 years if we want to have any semblance of affordable housing in the Greater Toronto, Southern Ontario area. Do you agree with that?
Well, if we look at the supply and demand factors, particularly what is contributing to that net number of 1.8 million, it seems quite realistic. However, a key assumption that's being made there is that there's this need for ownership, rental, and not quite knowing what do we do with our existing housing stock, such as we have a lot of homes that are somewhat empty. The question, of course, is will there be multiple generations in those homes? Will they remain that way? And where do those individuals go?
Why do we have a whole bunch of homes that are empty?
Oh, yes. So now we're talking about that missing middle component there, in which case individuals who've had accumulated quite a lot of equity in the homes, particularly those who have spent years paying off their mortgage, raising their children, and now have the benefit of sitting in some really great areas, but thinking about how do they downsize? And the question, of course, becomes, where do they downsize, and what is a realistic and affordable option for them to do so? And if you look at some of the housing dynamics, leaving aside some of the current fluctuations we've seen, there really isn't much suitable housing stock for them, whether it's in the form of smaller condos or just really outside of the neighborhoods and the communities that they've lived many decades around. So as a result, they tend to stay in place. So we do have a lot of friction.
They're living in big homes just by themselves, and they're empty nesters. And so you're saying that they're limited as to their opportunities for where to go. That's fascinating.
Well, that is also an opportunity if we think about how do we get to that 1.8 million. It's not just the number, but what we're building, where we're building, and for who. And then the bigger question becomes, are they going to be owned? Are they be rented? Or will we have new business models such as rent-to-own mechanisms to make it a bit more achievable for a lot of Canadians who just don't have the ability to put so much capital up front to meet their mortgage obligations?
So the Ontario government had a housing affordability task force a couple months ago. They came up with 55 recommendations. Only 5 or so were actually implemented into law. But one of the ones that was not implemented into law was really kind of interesting. It raised a lot of controversy. It would provide as-of-right zoning for people that own single-family homes to split it into 4, so that you could build a laneway house, or you could have a basement apartment, or you could have a mother's-in-law suite, or something like that. And one of the arguments they made was that people actually like living in neighborhoods that have 20 units per acre to 40 units per acre, which would be Port Credit, the Beaches, Blair West Village, Streetsville, etc., where most of Mississauga is 6 units per acre or less. It's the typical suburban sprawl. What do you think of that that suggestion that people could, without any zoning, going to City Hall for zoning, had the right to just build a basement apartment. Was that a good idea or a bad idea?
In theory, it'd be a game changer. And you ask anyone who's gone through the process of even trying to get a building permit and all the additional paperwork and requirement and compliance that goes into just trying to renovate your home in the context of putting in a basement apartment. It's a lengthy process. You need a lot of patience, time, and money to do so. Having an as-of-right option, however, to densify in the way that you described, does open up a lot of opportunities, not only to introduce more housing stock, but also in a way that means that you can monetize your home in ways that you never thought about. Jumping back to the example we gave about the empty nesters, well, that's an opportunity.
They could stay in their home.
They can stay at their home, but also recognizing that some of that backyard could be another unit.
Well, that's what's going to allow them to stay in their homes. They can do something other than the reverse mortgage that I see on advertised on TV every day.
Well, that's another story for another day, but it does give us an opportunity to think about housing more realistically, not so much of just being an asset that people hold and under the assumption it'll always grow, but making that housing stock work for you as shelter, as a source of income, but also as a way to offer shelter to other people as well.
So the seminar that you were on most recently was transit-oriented development, and the idea being that we're building these, electric go all-day, two-way, frequent GO train services or subway services or LRT services, and that the provincial government is interested in inducing greater development around those transit nodes and greater height, greater density, so that we can address some of these housing needs and affordability issues. But some people are reacting negatively to that, saying, no, there's too many one bedrooms, we need 2 and 3 bedrooms, there's too much height, there's no parking provided, we should have parking provided, it's too much density, we don't want density, we want single family homes. And the criticism is, well, those are NIMBYs, those are people that are the loudmouths within the society, not the new immigrants, not the people that don't even live in your community, that are coming to the community. And so therefore the people that get listened to are the ratepayers that are making the noise rather than the people that are needing the homes. Where do you come out on that whole discussion?
Well, I can give you a personal example, of which case I was drawn into this right when I began to start living in downtown Toronto, in which case I was one of those individuals in one of those single one-bedroom condominiums, in which case some of the individuals, particularly the policymakers, when I asked about are there additional housing stock, where could we accommodate the influx of professionals who are now graduating and new immigrants wanting to make the city of Toronto their home, and the response was that, well, you are the 905s, not the 416, which has been a dated reference.
What? So new immigrants should go to the 905?
Exactly.
Really?
So there has been a shift in the mindset since that time, and I'm talking about a decade, in which case there's a recognition that there can be gentle densification around those transit nodes that offer a lot of flexibility for individuals, whether they're starting out or they're relocating their professions because of the need to go back into, say, a city core, in which case those GO corridors make a great addition to what it means to be at home. That being said, stakeholder engagement, whatever you want to call that and whatever it looks like, is a cornerstone of our planning processes here in Ontario. So whether it's a loud ratepayer association or some of the local business unit holders, there is a degree of dialogue that comes into play, in which case our planning process does offer room for them to voice their opinions, in which case we've just recently seen some objections around some of those transit-oriented developments from some unexpected stakeholders asking about, well, is this the right type of development for our community?
So is there too much stakeholder dialogue or not enough stakeholder dialogue? So some people think that, that local people and local councillors aren't being listened to enough. And other people, this affordable task force actually said the opposite, said that it slowed down development, it takes too long to get zoning approvals, that it's too inexpensive to object to the OLT, and so the Ontario Land Tribunal, and so therefore, people will just put in, whatever argument they can, and one of the recommendations was to dramatically increase the cost of objecting to things. And so, is there too much stakeholder involvement or too little stakeholder involvement?
I would say it's the timing of the stakeholder involvement that we have to think about, because you're never going to quite get to that right balance being too much or too little, because it is very much location dependent, and what are the qualities of that neighborhood that otherwise attracts that type of transit infrastructure to go in, and hence the demand influence about wanting to live around there. And I say timing because when we think about some of the master planning, the secondary planning that goes into where these nodes are going to go and what that would mean in terms of the adjacent development, often those stakeholders don't even know what's going on. Or they might get a notice that might be in a local newspaper. Who reads a newspaper today? Like, there is this dynamic of who in fact
Yeah,
will
they've
be
got
the
to
ones who
mail out the
object.
mails to every house.
And the question, do people read that or not? And how does that interact if you're not always at home and you miss that open house? So there is quite a lot of complexity about how we in fact do that stakeholder outreach that really magnifies and compounds a situation whereby right when you get that development application, then a lot of individuals come from the woodwork that you hadn't even thought of as, say, a developer.
Yep.
That needs to be consulted so that you understand their needs and develop accordingly.
So I don't understand what your point is. We need more, but it's got to be earlier? Is that what you're saying?
Earlier and more strategic. And I say strategic because it's who you're bringing to the table, when and for how long. So if we think about some of the major transit infrastructure projects that go in, those are long-term projects.
Yeah.
And some of the stakeholders that were fined, say maybe 5 years ago, are now objecting to what goes in there. Not so much about the transit infrastructure, but about the adjacent development, because they're otherwise redirecting their frustrations there.
Okay, so the Ontario line has been announced, this new subway line, and the provincial government putting forth a whole bunch of these ministerial zoning orders to allow densification around the new subway stops that are going to be built. And this is long before the Ontario line has even broken ground. And so people will know, and developers will know, and Metrolinx, who owns a lot of the land around the stations, will know and can exploit the benefits of that development. Jennifer Keesmaat, the former chief city planner of the City of Toronto, was on one of my shows and said the biggest mistake we made on Bloor Danforth is we didn't do any of that. And Bloor Danforth is two stories high. The vast majority of Bloor Danforth doesn't look like Yonge Street, doesn't have density around subway stops. So what's the right strategy? Is it to do it early like we did on Ontario line, or leave it to the future and maybe it never happens like Bloor Danforth?
I would say what we're seeing with the Ontario line is in the right direction. So doing it early, having a better sense as to what are the type of communities we want to see around this transit infrastructure. For the most part, it's historic and how it's going to change a lot of those neighborhoods, but at least having the opportunity to have a say in what that would look like. And then provide the right housing product or even commercial product based upon those needs.
Okay, so we're in Mississauga. We have frequent good GO train service on the Lakeshore line. There's development proposals in Port Credit that have been opposed by local ratepayer groups. There's proposals at the Clarkson GO train station that have been opposed by local ratepayer groups. And they've been the typical issues, too much height, too many one bedrooms, et cetera, et cetera. What should government do? What should development companies do when local ratepayers, want to maintain the old flavor of Port Credit, the old flavor of Clarkson, even though they're right beside a GO train station that we're investing millions, if not billions of dollars in making major transit nodes?
Those are excellent examples of the need to identify that there's more options at play, rather than a significant amount of densification or none at all, but rather there's a spectrum. And there are different types of housing stocks or commercial stock that can be introduced based upon the significant value that a lot of individuals place in being located to some of those GO stations. And that's not to say that you're going to have a significant amount of condominiums that block out all lights. There could be the opportunity to have more, I would call gentle densification. So have multiple townhouses or stacked townhouse units, for example. Having different types of communal spaces peppered into how you otherwise design that. And it's quite difficult for one individual developer to be able to do that because they may not necessarily have access to a significant land parcel and assemble accordingly in order to realize that vision. So being able to have our local leaders to be able to work alongside about what that vision could look like and have in that process some of those city builders in that discussion can at least allow for that spectrum of different types of housing stocks to be presented to the local community.
Different kind, but housing stocks. But what does that mean? Does that mean that we're not going to have 30-story condominiums built and we're going to build stacked townhomes? I saw one site that was I think it was 10 acres, and there was 28 stacked townhomes on that acreage. and 200 condominiums. So there were two different proposals. And it was like a factor of 10, the difference between the number of condos you could build and the number of stacked townhomes you could build. And I guess you could build, maybe a dozen single-family homes. So the densification is dramatically more if you can build condos. And if housing is the problem, what are we going to do?
Well, I think you're really onto the crux of this all is the notion of there are many different stakeholders. There are many different policies that are in some cases supportive of what we want to do, but they're not consistently aligned to do so. And also the notion that there's so many different types of housing products out there that can meet that 1.8 million homes that has otherwise been put out there by CMHC. How we find the right mix means that we're going to have to take one step further in terms of all our different roles that we have and worked collectively towards that. And I say this not to put a damper on the development community. If anything, they're the ones who are pushing for what could be there.
Yeah.
But rather than just having the standard condominium block in a neighborhood that's more often not going to have opposition, and you're going to go back and forth through the lengthy process to get a middle ground, to be able to think about.
But
could there be different
condominiums
options
off
there?
major arterials or away from transit nodes don't make sense, right? You're not going to have the market. And so the market, and I'm not a libertarian, but the market's not going to want to build a condo in the middle of suburbia. It wants to be close to a transit node. It wants to be close to our arterial road because that's where the people that want to live in a big condo want to live. What you're going to do is you're going to maybe have some densification with the duplexes and the quadplexes or whatever they're called if this as of right zoning goes in, townhomes or things like that in the major parts of suburbia. Joe Barrage, Urban Strategies, came to one of the sessions that I had when I chaired the Mississauga City Summit. He said, we talk about this densification and people go crazy about it, but take a look at Yonge Street. You've got densification at Yonge and Eglinton. You got densification at Summerhill and Davisville, but one block away you got single-family homes. So it happens around transit nodes and on major arterials, but it doesn't go through the whole city. So in Toronto, it's going to be on Yonge Street. Maybe it's going to be on Danforth. It's going to be around the GO train stops. In Mississauga, it's going to be around the GO trains. It's going to be maybe around the LRT stops, but it's not going to be everywhere.
If I could add a different dimension to that, we also have to think about the type of transit that we're putting in. So when we think about, say, a lot of those light rail transit systems that are going in, and it's really going to connect so much of the Greater Toronto area together, but if you think about the time that it take you to get from one end to the other, that might shape whether or not you want to be located on that line or perhaps be willing to be a little bit further away, just in terms of the speed of that service and the likely congestion you might encounter when you're on those systems. And that will influence the type of housing
So what
stock.
are you saying? You're saying the LRTs are going to be too slow?
In some cases, if they're underground, they'll be much faster than those that are going to be above ground. And if they have their dedicated lane or not dedicated lane, that's going to influence the speed at which you're able to travel and hence the value that you're going to attach to be able to live next to one of the major stops.
Right.
And that will influence the type of individuals who will be willing to purchase units in that area. Is it going to be a bedroom, two bedroom, multiple bedroom?
So some of the criticism of the Huron-Ontario LRT is that it's above ground, it's on ground. It's not grade separated. It's going to have its own lanes, but it's going to have to stop at all the major stoplights, intersections, and also stop to pick up and drop off passengers, so that it's going to be slower than the car traffic, and it's not going to be like a GO train that is grade separated and goes and only has a few stops. And yet Square One has got an unbelievable amount of condominium development. Like, it's unbelievable what's happening there.
So Square One has the ability to draw in demand from many different places, and it isn't necessarily, at least from what I understand, the notion that you're going in one direction, such as going from Square One to, say, the city core, the City of Toronto downtown core. You could be going in many different directions or staying within Mississauga. So that has
Well, now you've got to, because there's no transit, so you've got to disperse. You need a car.
And that has then changed the direction in which you have development and to accommodate the individual who may not necessarily go in one direction. Whereas if you're on a dedicated GO transit line, which takes you in and out of Union Station in Toronto.
That's where you're going.
24/7. Exactly. So that's going to be the type of individual who'd want housing product there, and you'd build for them.
Yeah.
So that's where I think you get the sense of the spectrum that comes into play. And if we bring it back to some of the less frequent or not as quick transit infrastructure just going in, it may be great for certain individuals. not necessarily those that want to be able to connect to higher order transit to get downtown Toronto, for
Right.
example. And so those individuals be attracted to different types of housing stocks along that line versus others.
Fascinating. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more, and we're going to talk about waterfront development, because I understand you're also an expert on waterfront development. Stay with us. We're going to be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Our guest tonight is Sherena Hussain, who is a global thought leader in infrastructure. She's a lawyer. She's an advisor to new partnership and sustainable finance models. She's an expert on transit-oriented development. She's an expert on waterfront development. She's a professor. Where are you, at York? Is that where you're a professor?
That's correct.
Fantastic. In what area?
In real estate and infrastructure.
In real estate and infrastructure. How'd you get into being a professor in real estate and infrastructure? Like, that's a kind of a unique occupation.
Well, it is. And if you track my career, I did start off at the provincial agency that was in the process of creating public-private partnerships for different types of infrastructure. That was Infrastructure Ontario. And when I got a taste of that, I then tried to learn as much as I can in the context of infrastructure, but realizing very quickly that real estate and understanding land and how it interacts with the built environment is so important. So that's how I somewhat fell into that space, went into private practice at a very large law firm, in which case doing a lot of different infrastructure, but some large-scale commercial real estate as well, and then had the opportunity to join as a faculty member with that school, looking at how to build that master's program, but also staying on as an instructor today in terms of delivering some of that content, but also engaging industry to make sure that when we prepare our leaders in the real estate and infrastructure space, they have a sense of not only the theory, but what's emerging in practice.
Fascinating. Well, we should do a whole show sometime on 3P partnerships. That would be fascinating, because I have a point of view on those as well, so that's kind of interesting. But let's turn to waterfront development. So Mississauga has got two very major waterfront developments that have been approved and are in progress. One is at Mississauga Road and Lakeshore, the old Imperial Oil tank yard that has been remediated from an infrastructure, from an environmental liability standpoint, and the Lakeview Generating Station that was like 140 acres that's south of Cawthra-Dixie and Lakeshore, goes way out into Lake Ontario. Both are very significant developments. Both are like 10,000, if not more, people each in proposed population density. What do you think of those developments?
I think they're a great opportunity to use underutilized land, particularly those that haven't been able to achieve their highest and best use in years. So if you think about what those opportunities could have been had there not been these development opportunities, they would have not necessarily had the degree of excitement, but also achieved some of the bigger and broader objectives that come with being able to bring individuals into the city core, have them experience and enjoy the waterfront, but also in a way that introduces property tax revenue, stimulates the local economy, but then finds a way to, I would put it from one perspective, being able to then revitalize areas that were otherwise areas that you wouldn't want to visit, in all fairness.
Yeah. So, I agree with that, and some of the development, the pictures are spectacular. But, it's interesting, there was a big spread this past weekend in one of the major newspapers about the Mr. Christie site in Etobicoke at what is it, Park Lawn? Not Park Lawn, I can't remember right now what the street is, but Lakeshore, right proximate to the Humber Bay shores. 25 acres, and they say that it wouldn't work without a GO train station. And so they're putting a GO train station, and I think they're contributing to the construction of it, right in the middle of the development. And it's really quite exciting. The Mississauga Road in Lakeshore is 75 acres. And the Lakeview Generating Station is 140 acres or something like that. No new transit development for either one of those developments. And you got, think about all those people. And this is going against sort of the way I argued in the first half of our conversation, where ratepayers might be having too much sway. Here, what happened to the voice of people that are going to be demanding more transit? The roads, Mississauga Road, Lakeshore, here in Ontario, Dixie, Cawthra, are going to be a disaster, aren't they, after these kinds of developments?
Well, there's clearly the potential for that to happen. And what I really find interesting, if we look at, say, the Etobicoke example, was in the context of the developer's decision-making process and going through that dialogue, the need for transit infrastructure emerged early. And being able to bring in those stakeholders to then mobilize really the campaign and the business case to have a stop there. What we're seeing in Mississauga, from what I understand, is more so this notion that we haven't quite gotten there. The notion of some of those negative externalities, such as not having enough capacity in the local roads, or being in a situation whereby we're just going to add more and more cars to the local area because there's no realistic alternative, whether it's higher order transit or even medium order transit, in order to get to and from that site. And those are conversations that may very well emerge, but are they timed in the right fashion? We have yet to see whether or not those voices, or even some of the developers or even city planners, identify that there could be some issues and then start the process of bringing in that infrastructure discussion in the context of how you then construct now. Doing that after the fact makes it astronomically expensive to put that in after the fact.
Now, one of the, I think, beautiful things about the development proposals is they don't look like the concrete barriers that people criticized Harbourfront for. There really is a lot of waterfront streetscape, if that's the right word. Wide paths and access to at least look at the lake, if not access the lake. Is that a good idea?
I think that represents the lessons learned from what we've seen across other forms of waterfront development in the GTA. This notion of being disconnected from the waterfront, or even privatizing it in the sense that those individuals who have, say, units by the waterfront get to enjoy it, as opposed to individuals who may be a further walk or drive, or not even from the area. Yep. So I think this was an opportunity to rethink the waterfront for who, and then design according to that.
We have, one of my pet peeves is that we have signs all over Park Credit, Clarkson, etc. right now that say your parking tickets are doubled and tripled south of Lakeshore in the summertime, which sounds to me sort of like your issue about privatizing. What we're doing is, there's a whole bunch of people in Mississauga, northern Mississauga, Meadowvale and Streetsville, etc., that would love to come and down and enjoy the waterfront, but we never built enough parking. We didn't build the right transit to get there, so we double or triple the parking tickets. It seems like we're making it only for the people that live there.
And those will be conversations that will stimulate an alternative, whether it is, say, a shuttle service from another parking lot that will enable you to not get those parking tickets, have affordable, if not free parking, but still be able to access the waterfront in a timely manner, particularly when it's the summer months and you have tourists or individuals, I would say local tourists from across the region who want to experience the waterfront.
Right.
That's one opportunity that exists to otherwise avoid what you just described in the sense of waterfront for who. Well, it's not necessarily for all.
What's happening with development outside of the Greenbelt? You had mentioned that Shelburne is a very fast-growing community. Caledon is supposed to go from like 50,000 to 500,000 people. What's causing all this?
Well, what we're seeing as really a reaction to the notion that we have a lot of demand, and also policy dynamics that are pushing for getting close to that 1.8 million homes that we discussed earlier. And the question, of course, is, where are we going to put them all? And if it's not going to be in the densification that comes with high rises or even mid-rise condominiums, then we're looking at other forms of single-family housing stock opportunities.
So it's sprawl, it's suburban sprawl, and it's suburban sprawl on the other side of the Greenbelt. Is that not what's happening?
It could be. It could be looked upon that way. It could also be looked upon as an opportunity then to create and revitalize different neighborhoods that are already there and thriving, but now have the benefit of different type of infrastructure that's also going in to make that development opportunity more appealing to individuals that might feel priced out of some of, say, the City of Toronto or even Mississauga markets, and have, say, growing families or multiple generation families and need the extra space, such that some of the condominium units may not be appealing. And a key example, and I encourage you to look at it, would be where is high-speed internet going? And over the past 3 to 5 years, we've seen significant investments in which some of those areas outside the Greenbelt have had the benefit of rural high-speed internet come in, but also has had the benefit of making that far desirable development place.
Yeah, and you know, I think a lot of people during COVID and work from home decided they didn't need to live in downtown Toronto on a 500 square foot condominium, and so therefore may have relocated. And Joe Barrage, who I mentioned earlier, you know, he called in from a boat that he was living on in the Thousand Islands, and that sounds like a pretty good place to spend some time, and remote working allows it. But with return to work, maybe not full-time, but for a lot of people, a couple days a week, with far higher gasoline prices that make traveling far more expensive. You know, there was reports this past weekend that said the biggest drops in real estate were likely going to be some of those suburban slash rural towns, the 705, the 61, 705, et cetera, not necessarily the 905, but the areas, 519, 705, et cetera. You know, Brantford, Cambridge, et cetera, were used as examples of cities that could really see dramatic real estate declines.
Mm-hmm. And this is where we're going to see how it all shakes out at the end of the day. And you mentioned really good examples, whether it's high gas prices or just the time that comes with commuting in and out of the office and not quite knowing what your work schedule is going to look like, say, in the next 18 months once we get a sense of what it means to be in the office again. Is it truly social, or is that going to be the primary way in which we work again, in which case having the remote home office may not get much use. So you might spend 3 to 4 days a week taking an hour, 2-hour commute each way. And that's where we're going to see decisions begin to shift, whether it's in rethinking where we work, how we work, but also where we live. And I wouldn't necessarily say that we're going to see a significant decline in certain more suburban markets just yet, because not everyone has a commute into, say, the downtown core. We're seeing a lot of changes in terms of where people work, how they work, whether entrepreneurs or they're contractors, as well as employees. And that might have a big impact in terms of who decides to live outside of the Greenbelt versus stay within the Greenbelt.
You know, I heard John Tory at a speech he made a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that GO Transit is almost right back to its pre-pandemic levels, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but not Monday, Friday. And he said that harms our economics dramatically. We need people every day of the week to be using GO Transit. And so it would suggest that people are coming back to the city big time, but not full time. That, you know, it's going to be an issue. You're very diplomatic in your comments about stakeholder relations and stuff like this. Let me put forward an argument to you and see what you think. I've been involved in numerous different businesses. I've been in the pharmaceutical business, I've been in the real estate business, I've been in the entertainment business, I've been in the beer business, I've been consumer products, etc. And I'm far from a libertarian. But I think there's more government regulation in the real estate development business than in almost any other business I've been involved in, other than the pharmaceutical business. And even in the pharmaceutical business, you yourself had to do the study to prove whether the vaccine or the drug worked, and then you submitted it to the health organization to get approval, but you were still in control of your development. They didn't tell you how to design the study or the pill or the packaging. They had comments on it. But in the real estate development business, you know, the time to get approval, the cost to get approval, the planners that can comment on the number of parking spaces, the number of bike spaces, the height of the building, the shading that it applies or doesn't apply, the amount of amenity space, the materials that you use in the building, the meetings you got to have with the community groups, the neighborhood groups, etc. The impact that the local councillor has, where some people, Joe Barrage, I've used him before, said that the local councillors act like lords of fiefdoms that can decide what goes ahead or not. There's more regulation in the real estate development business, and that's what effectively this affordability task force of the Ontario government said, is that, and they had 55 recommendations to make it easier to manage the business. Isn't that the problem that we've got with affordability? It's lack of supply, and municipal governments are the cause of it. No?
Well, you're right in terms of the sheer complexity and the notion that to be in development is not for the faint of heart. You need a lot of time, resources, and expertise on your side to navigate the sheer mazes that you have to go through on a daily basis, not quite knowing how one stakeholder or one planner might look at versus an inspector versus someone else, and being really to juggle so many different balls all at once. In terms of looking at it, well, is that one of the key problems? It is a key challenge. And being able to cut through it and put a streamlined approach will assist as we move forward. But there are other elements that come into play too, such as looking at the price of land, where that land is located. Yes, it is influenced by the local policy environment, and thinking about how do you rezone that land for different uses, and that also has that those downfalls as we discussed before. But it's also part of that missing puzzle. I've been an advisor for different organizations, in which case they have a mission of trying to introduce affordable housing in terms of different municipalities across the province. And one of the key challenges that always was presented was the business model never worked. There was always a line that had to be plugged because there was a deficit when it came to all the additional cost, time, value of money, and then having the ability to still price out units at a rate that was considered below market or affordable. So rethinking that business model and looking at, say, capital sources, land swaps, those are other solutions that need to be thought about in tandem, in addition to the need to rethink the planning processes, which I take your point is a maze and challenging in and of itself.
So I'm wrong. It's not, government's not the problem here. It's potentially the solution.
It could be.
Okay. Sherena Hussain, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Sherena Hussain, an expert in land development, in infrastructure, and finance, a lawyer, an instructor at York University, and a very articulate commentator on real estate development. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.